Good morning, guys. We are reading from Across the Wide and Lonesome Prairie. We are going to be learning about the Oregon Trail and what life was like. So the last time that we stopped, we had just got to the South Pass. I'm going to show you on the map. Okay, the South Pass is right here. I want to make sure. So they are over halfway through the Oregon Trail, and the narrator of this book is Miss Hattie. Miss Hattie, they have had so many different heartache as they've went along. They've had several deaths. In fact, Hattie had been picking some wild vegetables, and she actually ended up killing some kids on accident. They've had some good things too. Like there's been weddings, there's some babies being born, there's been some amazing things as well. There's been some thievery, so there's old ladies stealing things from people. So what we have been learning, there's been another group of people coming through that they've had nothing really to do with, and that is a group of people called the Mormons, and they've been kept pretty separate. The Mormons are going because they believe in a different thing. They believe that they can have more than one wives, and the group that these guys are going with do not believe that. Now we've learned that different people are going for different reasons. Hattie's family has decided that they want to go because they want a fresh life. They want to go west because the year before they had heartache in their own family. Four of her siblings passed away from swamp fever, and they wanted a fresh start. So what we're going to do, I'm just going to read aloud to you, and I'll stop as we get to something exciting. We're camped here for 2 days. End of June. So they started in April, so this is end of June. We're camped here for 2 days at Pacific Creek to rest and celebrate. It's a wondrous feeling to think we are finally in the West. Now, the rivers and streams flow to the Pacific Ocean instead, eastward towards the Atlantic. Oh, that is interesting. Let me see if I can show you on my globe. Okay, so here, this is the Midwest here, so everything would be flowing this way towards the Atlantic in the Midwest, but once you got towards the west, everything's going to flow towards the Pacific Ocean. So they're finally towards the west, so everything can be flowing towards the Pacific Ocean, which is like a good thing for them because they're wanting to go to the west. Everyone was able to dipped a cup in the water and held it up for a cheer. The fiddlers got busy, and soon everyone was ready to dance. Everyone except Mama. She said not until her feet are in Oregon City will she celebrate. Remember, Ma was the one that was kind of hesitant. Pa was like, let's go. Ma was like, I'm not so sure about this. So Ma is like dragging her feet the entire way. She said not until her feet are in Oregon City will she celebrate. Some moments Mama is so grouchy, I know for certain I mustn't upset her with news about our thief. Remember, there's an old grandma that's she's the thief. She just will come to the camp and just take whatever she wants. But no one sees it except poor Hattie. For part of the day, we shared a campsite with the Mormons. Wow. Pepper and Gideon and Wade and I walk over to their wagons, curious. There was a fire where a spit held a roasting side of a beef. We saw 3 women busy carrying plates back and forth, but didn't see any children. I wondered which one was Brigham Young's wife. A colored man came over and introduced himself by the odd name of Green Flake. Then asked us to please leave on account of his people resting. That's weird. Someone said he once was a slave, but now is Brigham Young's personal servant. Sandy Creek. It's not on my map. Here the trail splits. Tall Joe, remember, is their guide. Tall Joe said there's a shortcut heading north that'll save 7 days, but it's 50 miles of desert. Eek. No trees, no water or grass for the animals. The days are blistering hot. The only time to travel is after sundown when it's cooler. Or he said the safest is to swing southwest down to Fort Bridger. It'll take longer, but it skirts the Wyoming desert. Okay, I can show you that. So they were at, I'm sorry, it's kind of hard to do this. Here's Fort Bridger. They were at South Pass, so they could go down this way, or he's saying they could go up instead of going this way. Our family had a discussion. Pa agreed we'd go with Tall Joe. The safest way on account of Aunt June might have her baby any day now. Both Ma and Mrs. Anderson begged for the safe route. They're afraid of being stranded in the middle of nowhere and of watching the children die from thirst. After supper, 8 families pulled out, heading north across the desert along the Sabal cutoff, maybe to reach Oregon a week earlier than the rest of us. We no longer see buffalo or their droppings. Tall Joe says the herds have gone north with them and the Indians. I am somewhat pleased we may not run into them again, though it's true they haven't bothered us. Later, Jake hit Benny with a stick because he says Benny threw sand at him. I scolded them both and made them walk the rest of the afternoon with me. Sometimes I wish they were grown up. Early July. Wow. So we went from just end of June to early July. After dark, I walked beyond camp around the circle to the Kinker's wagon. A lantern lit the inside, so I stood back in the shadows to see what I could see. The mister was sound asleep. Matter of fact, he was snoring loud, but Mrs. Kinker was busy with something in her lap. I stepped closer. She had Benny's blue sweater. She was quick as you please, unraveling the sleeve and rolling the yarn into a ball. I wanted to grab her by the throat. When did she steal Benny's sweater and why? I must tell Ma, even if she won't believe me. I hurried away to find her. At the edge of the camp, I saw Pepper's little wagon. The curtains were closed, and lamplight from the inside made it glow like a small, cozy lantern. I feel jealous that she has a husband and I have no one yet. Evening, Hattie, a voice said from the darkness. Who's there? I asked. Come sit with us, honey. There on a blanket was Mr. and Mrs. Big, leaning against their wagon wheel. We was just enjoying the sky. While you're out here, why by yourself? I sat with them, pulling my knees up inside my skirt, for the warmth was the cool breeze. We were facing west, a smear of pink just above the horizon. All that was left was the sunset behind us. Inside the circle was campfires singing. Folks were warming up for a dance. After some moments, I spilled about the story about Mrs. Kinker's starting with Ma Silverspoon. They listened. Finally, Mr. Begg said, "That poor woman." With his strong arms, he pushed himself a few inches off the ground and scooted closer to his wife. She spread her shawl over their laps. "Hattie," she said, "the Kinkers were our neighbors back at Elm Creek, Missouri. There's something you need to know about them." Mrs. Begg then told me that a few days before the families from Elm Creek planned to set out for Oregon, the Kinkers' house caught fire and burned to the ground. Everything was lost, all the supplies and the belongings, everything. But worse, all of their 2 grown sons died. Their sons were going to drive their wagon west and help them start a new life. It ain't right for her to steal, Hattie, but maybe she does because she's so full of grief and empty inside. For several minutes there was relief, then Mrs. Bigg spoke again. "Hattie, dear, we need to think very careful how to handle this. Let's give it a few days before deciding what to do." When I walked past the campfire back to my wagon, I began to feel better for having told my story to a grown-up, so I'm not to upset Ma about it, but now I feel mixed up about the Kinkers. July 7th, Wednesday. Now she knows a specific date. That's very interesting. I wonder how she came up to that date. It says Fort Bridger. So they've made it to Fort Bridger. This is as busy as Fort Laramie, but not as many Indians. Tall Joe pointed out 2 mountain men who were stretching beaver pelts into circular frames. "That one fella with the knife is Kit Carson, the scout who helped find a trail to Oregon. And that fella, that's Jim Bridger himself." Tall Joe lifted his hat in greeting when the 2 saw him. "Bridger started this trading post to help immigrants. That's why it's outfitted with a blacksmith, horses, plenty of provisions, you name it. He's the first white man to see that godforsaken Salt Lake where Brigham Young is headed, that scoundrel." Tall Joe blew his nose into his hand, then wiped his fingers on his pants. He said, "Jim Bridger has got a map of the entire western continent stored in his brain. Every river, mountain, and tree stump practically. We camped 2 days here, and outside the log walls there are tears now among the women, because here is where the trail splits for good. About 30 families are heading south to California." So some people would go to California and some people would go to Oregon. Remember, there was a debate in their family whether they should go to California and Oregon, and we had an opportunity to talk about that in our class. I'm so sad that we can't talk about all this in our class now. Deep breaths. It's okay. It's okay, right? So it sounds like 30 families are heading south to California, while the rest of us are going northwest to Oregon. Many friendships were made over the past 3 months, close friends. So, can you imagine traveling 3 months with friends and now you won't ever see them again? That's hard. I'm relieved that Pepper and I don't have to say goodbye to each other. Also, Mrs. Bigg, for I've grown very fond of her. Aside from Aunt June, she is my favorite lady. Fort Bridger is also where we part ways with the Mormons. Hooray for good riddance, said Tall Joe. Tall Joe has his own opinions about the Mormons, but remember, no matter what, those people are still people. It doesn't matter. Honestly, Tall Joe has his own opinion, but shame on him for being so small-minded about people. I watched the colored fellow named Green Flake climb into his wagon and take the reins. He waved at me and smiled. Then they were gone. Pa says the next year many of the wives and children will follow. So there will be more people coming. Jim Bridger has an Indian wife. I saw her with some other squaws. Now, we've had to talk about many different names that people would call Native Americans. We've got Indians, we've got Injuns, we've got squaws. So what we will call them is Native Americans. That's just what we're going to call them, okay? On the sunny side of the fort, staking down deer hides and skins. She was pretty and very young, about my age, I think. I wanted to talk to her, but didn't know what to say, so instead I waved howdy. She looked down at her lap. Maybe she is shy. Mrs. Anderson and Ma was by a creek washing our blankets. To wring them out, they stood 3 feet apart, each holding an end and twisting until all the water dripped out. Aunt June spread them in the grass to dry. Isn't that funny that they washed them and then they put them back in a dirty area? I mean, like, grass is usually clean, but it's still, like, now if we washed our clothes and put them on the floor, we'd be like, that's dirty, don't do that. When they saw me, they stopped talking, but I had already heard them. They were saying they'd be quite content settling at Fort Bridger, never to travel again. There was water, good earth to plow, plenty of people, and all our families were safe. Maybe Narcissa Whitman is braver than we are, Aunt June said about her friend. I don't know how she did it. Ma said, and who knows what's in Oregon? Who knows what will happen between now and then? There are Indians farther north, I'm sure. There's more danger than that tall Joe ain't telling us about. Oh man, I wonder what's going to happen next. Are they going to go farther? We're going to keep reading a couple more pages and then we'll be done for today. Next day, Benny's arm is healing. Oh, remember Benny fell, her little brother fell out of the wagon and got his arm ran over and it broke his arm. But Pa said luckily the bone didn't stick out, otherwise they would have had to cut off his arm. Gracious. Benny's arm is healing. Pa made a new splint so it's easier for Ben to move. The other good news is that Wade is back to telling jokes. The only problem left over from the hemlock, remember the hemlock is what Hattie picked up that she thought was a vegetable, but it was not a vegetable. It was actually poison. And it is what killed 3 of the kids, and then they were able to get enough charcoal from the fire inside Wade's mouth that he did not die. The only problem left over the hemlock is that his tongue is numb on the right side and his jaw aches. Tall Joe says he probably didn't eat very much of it, but Ma says it's a miracle from God that's all there is to it. A miracle. Mrs. Big called me over this morning before we pulled out from Fort Bridger. As she folded their blankets into a crate, she said, Hattie, Mr. Big's cart is missing. Something took it in the night. At noon, I helped Mrs. Big make a search of camp. She is so large that her steps are slow. The first wagon we went to was the Kinkers. I don't know what you're talking about, Mrs. Kinker said, and how dare you accuse us? We're just poor old people. Besides, I'm not feeling well, neither is my husband. Maybe everyone would like it if we just plump and keeled over and died before we get to the Oregon. Maybe you'd be happy then. Mrs. Big held up her hand. That's enough, she said. Go back to your nap, Mrs. Kinker. Sorry to bother you. When we were out of hearing distance, I said, if Mrs. Kinker's so innocent, why'd she make excuses for herself, and why ain't she upset to hear someone else stole Mr. Big's cart? Hattie, if she is a thief, then soon enough she'll make a mistake and folks will find out. It's not like she can leave town or hide. Mrs. Big rested a heavy hand on my shoulder. Be patient, honey. Afternoon, after a long pull up a creek called the Muddy, we've come to Bear River. There's a beautiful campsite with a trail coming in from the right. A piece of paper was nailed to a tree. Tall Joe read it first, then passed it around. They made it, folks, he shouted. The other wagons made it. Crossed the desert in just a few days ahead of us like. Cheers went on. Our horses, mules, oxen, cattle are grazing along the broad river bottom. It is the most peaceful sight. Groups of men are fishing and are sitting in the sun or exploring the meadows. There is the sound of children splashing and playing along the river. The women are spreading washcloths on the bushes, also sitting in the sun, talking, resting. Some are busy over cooking fires. Now it's not just Ma and Aunt June and Mrs. Anderson talking about going no farther, but several other families are discussing the very same thing. Why not settle here in the Bear River Valley? At supper, 5 families made an announcement. Place suits them, so they've decided to homestead. Said they'd not seen finer farmland either, but Pa wants to keep going. He is so set on Oregon and living by the Pacific Ocean. He can't think of anything else. Pa said he's had too many dreams that were lost or forgotten or that he just gave up on. This is our last chance, Augusta, so to just fulfill a dream as big as Oregon. Please stand by me. I need you. Ma said all she dreams is keeping her family safe. As for me, my dream is that Pepper and I will always be friends, and that I will someday be adored by a husband I love, and maybe Pepper and I can still live next door to each other. So we're on the trail again, 10 days from Fort Hall. I'm going to show you, we're going to stop here, but I'm going to show you on the map where they're at. They've got really far. So we're at Fort Bridger, and they're almost to Fort Hall. They're almost to Fort Hall right here. Thank you for joining me. I hope you are having enjoying this, and you are learning a little bit about the Oregon Trail.